The memory loss became less important than the man he was becoming, the man he chose to be each day. Gentle, dependable, quietly strong, but something deeper had taken root between them, not loud or dramatic, but blooming like wildflowers in the cracks of their silence. It was in the way Leo would lean a little closer when they worked in the garden, how his hand would linger on hers when passing her a jar or a tool, how her eyes would follow him without meaning to, how her lips would part when he laughed, so rare, so pure that it made her chest ache. One late summer night, when the moon was high and silver, he sat beside her on the back porch, both of them sipping iced tea that had gone watery and warm. The fireflies blinked like timid stars over the field. He said her name,
Tessa.
Like he was tasting it for the first time. And then, he touched her. Heart's Audio Library presents Echoes of a Forgotten Love, a novel by Honey Hearts. But before I start this story, kindly hit the subscribe button and also hit like if you like the story. Thank you. Part 1. The sun was sinking low, casting long golden beams across the open fields of Monroe Valley. Cornstalks rustled softly in the breeze, swaying like quiet prayers whispered into the wind. Tessa walked with slow, steady steps beside her mother, Doris, their hands carrying cloth sacks still dusted with bits of husk and leaf. They had spent the day helping neighbors harvest corn from acres of sun-drenched farmland, their skin bronzed by labor and laughter. Now in the hush of evening, the road home felt sacred, almost suspended in time. Tessa loved this hour, when the sky bled into hues of fire and lavender, and everything felt more honest, stripped bare of pretense. Her boots crunched against the gravel road, and she could hear the faint creak of her mother's joints keeping rhythm beside her. They didn't need to talk. The silence between them was lived in, soft like the calluses on their palms. Then came the sound. A faint, raw groan, not the kind made by the wind or by birds rustling in the brush. It was human and wounded. Tessa's breath caught. She froze mid-step, eyes narrowing toward the ditch along the side of the road. Between the overgrowth and the shadows, something shifted. Someone! Mom, she whispered, already stepping forward. There, half hidden in a nest of tall grass and dirt, lay a man. Blood smeared across his face, his shirt soaked and torn, one hand feebly clutching at his ribs. His chest heaved in shallow, strained intervals. The setting sun lit the edge of his jaw, sharp and dust-covered, his lips cracked, eyes fluttering with pain. "Oh my God," Doris muttered, kneeling despite the creak of her knees. "He's still breathing," Tessa said quickly, her pulse leaping to her throat. "He's alive." They didn't know who he was. He wore no jacket, no wallet in his pockets, no phone. Only a pair of mud-streaked jeans and a blood-stained white shirt clung to his bruised frame. There was no car nearby, no sign of what had done this to him. But Tessa saw something in the way he groaned, not fear, not rage. Just a plea. "We can't leave him here," she said. Her mother hesitated, torn between caution and compassion. "We don't know what happened to him. He could be dangerous. Or someone could have tried to kill him," Tessa replied softly. "And if we walk away now, he won't make it through the night." In the end, kindness won. Back at their modest home on the edge of the valley, they did what women like Doris knew how to do. She boiled herbs and roots passed down from her grandmother's remedies. Tessa cleaned his wounds with a trembling gentleness, her fingers surprisingly steady for someone who had never seen this much blood outside of a movie screen. They stitched what they could. They dressed what they couldn't. And they waited. 2 days passed before he opened his eyes. When he did, there was no recognition in them. Not of them, not of himself, not of the world. Part 2. The first thing he said was a question. "Where am I?" His voice was hoarse, like gravel dragged across dry ground. Tessa had been sitting quietly on the edge of the room, peeling apples for a pie she wasn't really planning to bake, when his voice pierced the hush of the house. She dropped the paring knife. He was staring at the ceiling, eyes wide and glassy. His chest rose in uneven pulls of air. For a moment, he looked like he might panic, like his own breath was foreign to him. Tessa approached slowly. "You're safe," she said, keeping her voice low, warm. "You're in our home." He turned his head toward her. The sunlight coming through the lace curtain caught the curve of his jaw, the split in his lower lip, the confusion in his gaze. "I don't know who I am," he whispered. And he didn't. They'd hoped maybe when he woke up, something would come back. A name, a memory, a face. But there was nothing. He didn't know what year it was, who the president was, what his own voice even sounded like. He looked at his own hands like they belonged to someone else. He was blank. So they gave him a name. Leo. It was Tessa who chose it, softly uttered at the kitchen table that night as Doris spooned stew into 2 bowls. "He looks like a Leo," she'd said half to herself. Strong, quiet, like the sky just before a thunderstorm. Doris had only glanced up. "We can't keep calling him the man." And so Leo he became. He healed slowly, wrapped in layers of quiet moments, the smell of cedar soap as he bathed for the first time, the soft scratch of wool blankets on skin that hadn't known comfort in weeks, the weight of unfamiliar clothes, Tessa's father's old shirts, hanging on his broad frame. He never asked for much. He didn't pry. He moved like a man who knew his place was borrowed, who understood gratitude without needing to say it out loud. Sometimes Tessa caught him standing at the window, gazing out toward the horizon like it might whisper something back to him. His eyes were always searching, though for what, he couldn't say. And she was searching too. She didn't mean to get attached. She'd told herself it was sympathy, that was all. But Leo didn't feel like a stranger anymore. He moved through their lives with a gentleness that made space for him, one quiet gesture at a time, offering to stack firewood, fix a loose fence post, help Doris lift bags of feed into the shed. He began to belong, and Tessa began to feel it in dangerous ways. In the way she noticed the arch of his neck when he leaned over the sink to wash dishes. The way her heart skipped when his hand accidentally brushed hers. The way she started to forget that he'd once been broken and bleeding by the road, and instead began to see him as someone she wanted to keep. He was a mystery, yes, but he was hers. The first time she dreamed of him, she woke with her breath caught in her throat, her body warm with something she couldn't name. She saw his hands, those large scarred hands, brushing her cheek, cupping her waist. She saw his mouth pressed to her collarbone, soft and reverent. She saw herself opening to him, not in fear, but in need. Tessa sat up in bed and pressed a hand to her chest. She told herself it was a dream, nothing more. But by the time spring came, Leo was no longer just a guest in their house. He was part of the rhythm. And she was falling in love with a man who didn't even know who he was. Part 3. The house no longer felt like it had 3 people in it. It felt like one whole family. Leo started taking the lead in morning chores, hauling water, fixing the broken barn latch, gently nudging Doris to sit and rest while he picked the herbs she normally gathered herself. When he smiled, it was still small, still cautious, like he didn't quite believe he deserved joy. But it was real. And it was starting to linger longer on his face when Tessa was near. He never remembered his past, not even flickers. Doris said maybe it was God's way of giving him a clean slate. Tessa didn't argue. Sometimes she even let herself believe it too. The memory loss became less important than the man he was becoming, the man he chose to be each day. Gentle, dependable, quietly strong. But something deeper had taken root between them, not loud or dramatic, but blooming like wildflowers in the cracks of their silence. It was in the way Leo would lean a little closer when they worked in the garden, how his hand would linger on hers when passing her a jar or a tool, how her eyes would follow him without meaning to, how her lips would part when he laughed, so rare, so pure, that it made her chest ache. One late summer night, when the moon was high and silver, he sat beside her on the back porch, both of them sipping iced tea that had gone watery and warm. The fireflies blinked like timid stars over the field. He said her name, Tessa, like he was tasting it for the first time. And then he touched her, not in hunger, in reverence. His fingers skimmed along her cheek, down the line of her jaw, and stopped just below her chin, lifting it gently so her eyes met his. No words were spoken. There didn't need to be any. She leaned in, or maybe he did. Their lips met in the softest collision, like a question that had been lingering for months had finally found its answer. That night, Leo didn't sleep on the couch. He didn't sleep much at all. In the stillness of her bedroom, with nothing but the rustle of wind through the window and the hush of breath against skin, they explored each other slowly, like they were building something sacred out of bruises and longing and trust. Tessa wasn't experienced, but she wasn't afraid. Not with him. He kissed her like she was something he remembered from a dream. Something holy, fragile, and needed. Her dress slipped from her shoulders like a confession. His touch was hesitant at first, then urgent, then impossibly gentle again. They came together in a hush of limbs and gasps, heat and ache. And when it was over, he didn't move. He just held her. That was the night she whispered, "I love you." And he answered not with a name, not with a promise of who he had been, but with a quiet, aching, "I love you too." They married 6 months later in a modest ceremony behind the farmhouse. The grass was green, the sky was wide, and the whole town came to celebrate. Doris cried, partly from joy, partly from fear, but she gave them her blessing all the same. Tessa had never worn white before, and Leo, now Leo Montefalco on paper, thanks to forged but passable documents, wore her late father's old suit. They danced under lanterns strung between trees, laughing into each other's necks, clinging to the magic of the moment like it might keep them safe from whatever lay outside their tiny world. He had no past, but he had her. She had no answers, but she had him. And for a while, that was enough. Until one day, it wasn't. Part 4. It was the eve of their first wedding anniversary. Tessa had spent the whole morning preparing, baking his favorite bread, pressing her softest dress, picking wildflowers from the edge of the wheat field where they'd first kissed. She was humming, half smiling, folding napkins into triangles when he told her. "I'm going into town," Leo said. "Just for a few hours." Tessa turned to him, confused. "Now? Why?" He kissed her cheek, left his lips there longer than usual. "I want to get you something." "You already gave me everything," she murmured. But he was already out the door, boots crunching against gravel, the sun high and warm as he made his way to the bus stop. The city pulsed with life in a way Monroe Valley never could. Fast, sharp, loud. Leo kept to the edges, head low, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of it all. He hadn't been back to any place remotely urban since the day Tessa found him bleeding by the road. He walked through the aisles of a department store, fingers brushing jewelry boxes and scarves. None of them felt right. None of them felt like her. So he left. The accident happened just after noon. A car, fast and careless, clipped him as he crossed the street. The impact sent him sprawling onto the curb. His shoulder cracked against the pavement, his elbow scraped raw, and for a moment the world tilted. People ran toward him. Voices blurred. Someone offered water, someone else yelled for help. Leo sat there, blinking at the sky, blood trickling down his arm. And that's when it began. A sound. A name. A face. Not Tessa's, but a woman in pearls, weeping. A man in a suit, proud and stern, handing him a diploma. The feel of a golden chain around his neck. And a voice. His own voice, stronger, clearer, reciting prayers he hadn't known he knew. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." He stood slowly, ignoring the ache in his legs, and walked. His feet led him somewhere old, somewhere familiar. A walled village of manicured hedges, wrought iron gates, elegant stone homes. He walked through the front door without knocking. A woman shrieked, clutched her chest, then crumpled to the floor in sobs. A man followed, mouth trembling. "Lucian?" the man said. "Lucian, is it really you?" They called him Lucian Alden Montefalco. Their son, their pride, their miracle returned. But as he sat on the edge of his old bed, staring at photographs he couldn't yet name, more memories spilled through the cracks. He remembered the cause of his accident. He hadn't just been on a simple charity mission with his seminary brothers that day. He had been running, not from the church, not from his family, but from something deeper, a decision he wasn't ready to voice out loud. Lucian had begun to feel distant from the life he was preparing to commit to. The pressure from his devout, well-respected parents weighed heavily on him. They had always expected him to be perfect. The golden boy who would carry the family's legacy not just through good deeds, but through godliness. Every step he took toward priesthood felt less like a calling and more like an obligation. And then he met someone. Not romantically, but someone in the outskirts of town. A runaway teenager he'd helped shelter for a night during a mission trip. That small rebellion, hiding the boy in a parish guest house without permission, caused a rift between him and the seminary elders when it was discovered. His superiors didn't see compassion. They saw disobedience, recklessness. The incident sparked an argument with his father, the worst they'd ever had. Angry, guilt-ridden, and unsure of who he was becoming, Lucian decided to drive back to the charity site alone that evening, determined to pray, to think, to escape the noise of expectations. He never made it. A vehicle came too fast around a curve. Swerved. Blinding headlights. Then nothing. The next thing he remembered after that was Tessa. Tessa waited until sundown. The bread was cold. The candles melted in their holders. The wildflowers drooped in a jar of now warm water. He didn't come back. Not that night. Not the next day. Not the week after. Her hope turned to sickness. And then to fear. She searched. God, she searched. Shelters, hospitals, diners, corners of the city she didn't even know existed. She asked strangers if they'd seen him. Cried in the back pew of a church, begging for a sign. And then she saw him. In the distance, beyond the sanctuary, near the altar, in a white robe. Her legs turned to air. The man she loved, the man she married, the man who had whispered "I love you" into her hair, stood there in full vestment, flanked by candles and incense. Lucian. He moved with such grace, such certainty that she almost doubted herself. Part 5. She waited until the service ended. Tessa stood outside the cathedral, numb beneath the crush of marble and stained glass. Her hands trembled. Her breath came in short, ragged pulls. People filed past her, murmuring their blessings and farewells, none of them seeing the storm in her eyes. She waited until Lucian, Brother Lucian, they called him now, stepped out the side entrance with 2 older parishioners. He looked taller somehow, solemn in a way she'd never seen. The collar around his neck made her heart stutter. He was smiling, until he saw her. He froze. Tessa stepped forward, her voice a whisper. "Leo." His brows drew together, but he didn't speak. She moved closer. "It's me." "Tessa." He blinked, almost flinched. His lips parted, but no recognition came. No warmth. No joy. Just silence. Then a woman, stern, elegant, rushed forward. "You again?" Her voice was sharp, brittle with judgment. "What kind of sick story are you trying to sell this time?" "I'm not selling anything," Tessa said, her voice shaking. "He's my husband." "Impossible," the woman snapped. "Lucian is a man of God. A seminarian. He would never—" "I'm telling the truth," Tessa whispered. "We were married. We shared a home. A life." Lucian looked at her, really looked, and something shifted in his face. A flicker of doubt. A pull of something ancient and unspoken. But he stepped back, and that alone nearly broke her. "I'm sorry," he said softly. I don't remember you." His mother's hand wrapped around his arm possessively, pulling him away. Tessa stood frozen outside the restaurant window later that week, rain slicking the glass, her breath fogging the view, as she watched him sit at a linen-covered table with people who looked like him. Educated. Refined. Untouched by soil and labor. He laughed. He nodded. He moved on. But her heart hadn't. She returned to the cathedral often. Sometimes she just sat in the back, staring at the space where he preached. Other times, she lingered near the garden path, watching him from a distance. Eventually, she gathered the courage to speak again. Not to confront, just to talk. And he let her. Their conversations were civil, polite. Sometimes even warm. But never familiar. Never Tessa and Leo. Still, she didn't give up. She reminded him of Monroe Valley, of the house with the creaky steps, the way the wind smelled during harvest, the song she hummed when peeling apples. She told him about their wedding, the fireflies, the way his hand trembled before he kissed her that first time. He listened, but he didn't remember. And yet, something in him changed. He lingered longer after Mass. He asked about her mother. He smiled more when she was near. Tessa told herself it meant something. But each time she saw him kneel at the altar, whispering his devotion to a god she could never rival, the guilt twisted in her gut. Was she trying to steal a man from his calling? Was she selfish for still loving him? Or worse, was she fighting for a love that never truly existed? Not in this version of him. Part 6. The sky over Monroe Valley hadn't changed. It was still wide, still open, still cradled the sun in soft gold at dusk. The road curved gently through fields of tall wheat, past the wooden fences Lucian didn't remember building, toward a house that once held his life in its walls. He didn't come willingly. Tessa hadn't begged. She simply asked. One day, she said, "That's all I'm asking. Come with me. Let me show you." He didn't know why he said yes. Maybe it was her voice, quiet but resolute, filled with something he couldn't name. Or maybe it was the ache in his chest that pulsed stronger every time she left him standing on the steps of the cathedral, her eyes full of a pain that never accused, only remembered. So he came. And the moment his boots hit the gravel road that led to the farmhouse, something shifted. The trees whispered. The air changed. The wooden gate creaked in that same familiar rhythm, and he paused at the threshold of a memory just beyond reach. The house hadn't changed either. It was small, a little slanted, smelling faintly of lavender and old wood. Doris stood in the doorway, her gray hair pulled back, her eyes watery. She didn't speak. She simply stepped aside. Inside, Tessa moved like she always had, quiet, steady. Her hand brushed against a chair as she passed, a table, a photo frame turned face down. She didn't rush. She let the house speak for her. She led him to the porch out back, to the bench beneath the old sycamore, and then to the riverbank where the mango tree had once stood like a witness to secrets. It had been cut down last fall, but the stump remained, raw and cracked like an open wound. "This is where we used to fight," she said softly, sitting on the stump. "And where we always made up? You said the river calmed your thoughts." Lucian stood still. He closed his eyes. The wind picked up, lifting the hem of his coat. And then it happened. One memory, then another. Then more, crashing like waves. The sting of thread as she stitched his wounds. The sound of her laugh in the early morning. The warmth of her body curled next to his in the dark. Her hands on his chest, her lips on his neck, whispering his name. Not Lucian, but Leo. Their wedding night. Her trembling fingers unfastening his shirt. The promise. No matter what, no leaving. He staggered back. "Tessa!" His voice cracked. She turned sharply. Her name on his lips didn't sound like confusion anymore. It sounded like recognition. "Leo?" she said. He dropped to his knees on the cold grass. "Tessa!" "I remember." He wept like a child. Not just for what he'd forgotten, but for what he had almost surrendered. For the home that had taken him in, the woman who had loved him through silence, and the life that had wrapped itself around his soul when he was no one. She knelt beside him, wrapped her arms around him, and they stayed there, clinging to the moment, to each other, to everything they had almost lost. Part 7. Lucian didn't return to the cathedral. He wrote a letter instead. Long, handwritten. He spoke of a journey, of forgetting and being found, of the God he still served, but in a different way now, through love that had healed him when faith alone could not. He sent the letter quietly, asking not for understanding, but for peace. Tessa didn't ask him to stay. She didn't have to. He spent his days back in Monroe Valley not as a priest, not as a lost man, but as himself. He repaired the front steps. He rebuilt the barn door that always leaned open when the wind came. He kissed her on the forehead before breakfast, on the shoulder when she hung laundry, on the lips every time he passed her without reason. And every day, more came back. The way her skin had felt that first night. The curve of her smile after he asked her to be his wife. The trembling in his own hands as he slipped a ring, simple and silver, onto hers under a sky full of stars. One evening, he stood beneath the sycamore stump with a new ring in his palm. This time, with a license. A real name. And every memory. Epilogue. They married again in spring. In a grand church just outside the valley, with the sun pouring through the stained glass like melted gold, Lucian took Tessa's hand and spoke his vows with a voice that trembled only once when he said her name. Tessa wore ivory, not white, a color earned through fire. Doris wept quietly in the second row. And Lucian, once Leo, once lost, stood at the altar not as a broken man or a servant torn between two worlds, but as a husband. After the ceremony, as bells rang and the scent of lilacs filled the air, he leaned down and whispered against her ear, "I was made to serve. But not just the heavens. I was made to love you." And she smiled, not with relief, not even with joy, but with the stillness of someone who had known the storm and chosen to stay anyway. They walked away hand in hand, not toward a perfect life, but toward one they had fought to remember and would never forget again. The end. Thanks for listening. And again, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and hit like if you like the story. See you in my next audio story. More power,